Magandang hapon po. Hello and welcome to the August 2021 edition of the UP SLIS webinar series organized by the UP School of Library and Information Studies. We welcome our viewers, students, and teachers of library and information science, information professionals, and all our friends and fans in the Philippines and around the world. I'm Paul Jason Perez, a faculty member of the UP SLIS, your host and moderator for today. Before we proceed, this webinar is in high definition or HD, so for an optimal viewing experience, please check and adjust the settings of this live stream to HD. Right now, you may also check the audio and adjust the volume to a comfortable listening level. This webinar can be seen live on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page, UP SLIS. We also have our official channel on Twitch TV, so you can watch this webinar at twitch.tv/UPSLIS. This webinar is still part of our hashtag Webinar Wednesday, which we have been offering since last year of July. This year's webinar is also part of the celebration of the 60th anniversary of the UP SLIS. Before we proceed to our talk, allow me to explain the mechanics of this webinar. If you have any questions, you may post your question by going to Slido, that is www.slido.com, and typing in the code PRINTPH or hashtag PRINTPH. Again, that is slido.com with code PRINTPH. We will not be entertaining questions posted in the chat or comment section of this video. Again, you may post your question by going to slido.com and typing in the code PRINTPH. The website and code will also be shown on the screen throughout the talk. Alternatively, you could also use the QR code shown on the screen to go to the questions page. If in case you miss portions of this webinar, you may view this as a Facebook video or check our YouTube and Twitch channels. We'll have yet another interesting and informative webinar this afternoon. So I hope that you are all excited, and kahit ako, excited na rin ako sa topic na to because this is something that is very new, no? Especially in our field, and something that is really needed for us. I know that you're excited to meet our speaker, so allow me to introduce her to you. Currently, I'm just experiencing some internet connectivity problems, so please bear with me, okay? Apologies. Ayan, ganyan talaga pag live, no? My apologies. It seems like we're having some internet connectivity problems. But despite that, we thank you for bearing with us, and we're still happy na meron tayong ganitong event. This is a very interesting topic. And for me, I'm just excited to introduce our speaker today. So to introduce our speaker, Karryl Kim Sagutrahano is a postgraduate lecturer at the Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. She received her PhD in Information Studies in the same university through the NTU Research Scholarship Scheme. She holds a master's degree in technology management and a bachelor's degree in library and information science, both from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She carries more than a decade of experience in the knowledge services industry and is a seasoned social science researcher, academic librarian, administrator, and project manager. Her research, published in various international peer reviewed journals, revolves around information culture, industries, and professions. Karryl also received further training in qualitative methodologies as an NTU scholar at the University of Essex in the UK, and was one of the 2018 recipients of the Emerging Scholar Award presented by the Common Ground Research Network at the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. Everyone, we're very fortunate this afternoon to have Dr. Karryl Kim Sagun Trajano. Hi, Karryl. Now on with our lecture.
So magandang araw po sa ating lahat. It's good to be back here in SLIS kahit online lamang po muna tayo sa ngayon. Kaya I wish to thank Dean Mary Grace, my dear Prof. Ninang Rhea, the UP SLIS Tech team na tumutulong sa akin to make this presentation happen, and the rest of the UP SLIS faculty and staff for having me here at Web Wednesday. So it's such an honor to be here, and I'm really glad that I can share my work with our UP SLIS community, especially these two subjects that are closest to my heart, which is phenomenology and the Philippine print book industry. So this lecture will be largely based on my thesis, both topic-wise and method-wise. So ito po yung pinagugulan ko ng higit sa 4 na taon dito sa Singapore. So the entire manuscript consists of 9 chapters, but for this afternoon, we will zoom into one specific study, and that would be the one that I did on the Philippine University Publishers, or our academic presses. So yung iba siguro we will talk about it next time, because we do have time limitations this afternoon, at saka kasi baka sa susunod wala na tayong mapag-usapan. So sabi nga ng tatay ko, who I think is also in the audience today, blessed are those who keep their presentations short, for they shall be invited again. So yung mga naturuan ko na research methods in the audience, in one way or another, would know that I'm all for pragmatism without sacrificing quality. So for me, good research does not and should not cover everything under the sun. And because of that, I limited my investigation to niche publishers. And although we do have a very flourishing and very well-oiled textbook publishing business in the country, my initial investigation of its intricacies revealed that 4 or even 5 years will not be enough for me to go in depth and truly penetrate the industry. So it is a very complex, highly commercialized aspect of the Philippine book trade that I felt I could not give justice to it given my time and brain power constraints. So however, Dr. Vernon Tatanes, who did his PhD years before I did, and these are just mga side kwento, ano? So he did his PhD thesis on Teodoro Agoncillo's History of the Filipino People. So ngayon, napakatagal ko nung nag-CAS 1 and CAS 2, pero baka meron ako dito mga kaedaran sa audience na nakakaalala sa librong ito. So si si Dr. Tatanes did an entire dissertation on editions of this one single book. And it's a very fine piece of work. So walang bola dito ha. So if you know Dr. Tatanes, he's really a perfectionist. Kaya alam mong quality work talaga to. So I encourage you, the librarians in the audience, to take a look at it. And it's now on open access. So he did 4 or 5 years or so on this one single title. So just imagine na lang the volume of data in terms of looking at the entirety of a textbook publishing industry in a country such as the Philippines. So, ayun, this is the reason why I focused on niche publishers. And even as I found my niche on the niche, there were still other niches that I didn't get to cover. So, for instance, we have a very vibrant religious publishing sector in our country. So, these are just the known limitations of my study. So, I also posed two research questions. The first one being, what does the contemporary book trade landscape look like from the perspective of niche publishers in the Philippines? And the second is, how do they operate with the current state of the industry wherein both print and digital materials are in existence? So for the first one, I'm cognizant that it's a very top management perspective. So for sure, iba yung itsura ng landscape if I did the interviews from the ground. So very simple lang itong aking RQs. They really just stem from my curiosity as a researcher and also from the acknowledgement that this is an understudied area. Kaya I really wanted to begin with the basics to help me set the foundation. And so I attempted to answer these two questions using a two-pronged approach. The first is through a contextual documentation, and second, through an analysis of the narratives alongside Robert Darnton's communication circuit. So I will discuss this in the succeeding section on the history of book history. So much of the initial focus on book history, even globally or at least in the developed West. So when I say developed West, I mean Europe and North America. Much of the focus was on bibliography. So, however, there came a movement from texts to the sociology or the life cycle of texts, picked up by librarian and book historian Robert Darnton. So ito si Darnton, idol ko talaga to. So kasi bukod sa librarian na siya, isa rin siyang book historian. So peg na peg ko talaga tong taong to. And aside from that, he's also a very good writer. So he has a lot of books on book history from the perspective of a really good librarian. This is just one of them. This is one of his books, Censors at Work. Um, this was hand sold to me by a Singaporean independent bookseller. So I was just browsing dito sa isang independent bookstore. If you've been here, sa ilalim siya ng MRT ng City Hall. So malapit sa Bugis area. So unfortunately, nagsara na sila even before the pandemic. Business has been tough on physical bookstores here in Singapore. And anyway, nung bukas pa sila, I was really just browsing, and the owner or the bookseller recommended this specific title to me. So, ang galing lang. So, based on what I was browsing, he felt that this would be of interest to me. And just as another kwento, no, si Darnton is one of my heroes. But my thesis, although very much guided by him and his work, my work also criticized his work quite heavily. So I really poked holes at his model. I pointed out areas for improvement and some of his blind sides, which was probably because he was standing over there in a much more privileged position, and I'm right here closer to the ground in a developing country context. So I was looking at his work from a different angle. So, ang point dito sa kwentong to kung bakit ko binabahagi sa inyo is that people can look up to you and still find fault or areas of improvement in your work. And more often than not, this is not personal. So, sa magti-thesis sa atin dito and even those who are under any form of peer review sa journal, sa conference, or even as a manuscript, remember that their comments on your work are unlikely to be comments on you as a person. So, the committee is there to help you improve your work. Kaya nga sila nagugugol ng oras, saka brain power para basahin at komentuhan yung trabaho ninyo. So, actually, I had the audacity to email Robert Darnton and tell him about my work, my critiques of his work also. And surprisingly, nag-reply talaga siya and nagpasalamat pa talaga siya sa akin. So, my idol status sa kanya was cemented since then. And so going back to book history, Robert Darnton wrote a seminal article in 1982, and I encourage all librarians to read this at least once. This article traced the life cycle of books during the 18th century in Great Britain. So he discovered a treasure trove of documents, and from there he was able to analyze and create this one, the communications circuit. So Darnton traced how the book is born and developed through an author who initiates the point of creation, passing it on to the publisher who commissions the printer. And the printer also has his own suppliers of paper, ink, type, and labor. And then it gets to the hands of the shipper. So may iba-iba ring klase ng shipper. So merong agent, meron din yung mga hindi gaanong legal, kagaya ng smugglers. And then these shippers ship the books to the bookseller. So iba-iba rin ang klase ng bookseller. Merong wholesaler, may retailer, meron din yung peddlers on the street. So in 18th century Britain, sikat na sikat yung mga peddler, yung mga naglalako ng libro, ng mga chapbooks sa streets. And then finally, we have the reader. So according to Darnton, may iba't ibang klase rin ng reader. Merong purchasers, yung talagang bumibili ng libro. May borrowers, usually, of course, we know this in the library. And interestingly, but also to me, weirdly, he lumped clubs and libraries under this group. So if you'll notice also here, may binder na character, no? So it is this way because nung unang panahon, noong 18th century, yung mga mayayamang readers or the book collectors will employ their own binders. So sila mismo yung magpapabind using the same materials. For example, lahat yan brown leather. And then may pa-heat stamp with their initials, usually with gold foil, so that it will look nicely on their shelves, yung collection nila. So, ayun, a little side kwento lang ulit. So, itong circuit na to forms a model which looks like this. And according to Darnton, the cycle is completed as readers turn into authors here, represented by the dotted line, as authors are, according to Darnton, readers themselves. So, despite the existence of earlier studies on the book in society by Fevre and Martin as early as 1958, who highlighted the impact of the book in the social context of Western Europe during 1950 to 1800, Marshall McLuhan, of course, in 1962, who studied the effect of the printing press on European culture in his seminal work, The Gutenberg Galaxy, and Elizabeth Eisenstein, in 1979, who focused on the printing revolution during the 15th century West. It was the novelty of recognizing these external influences that rendered Darnton's oft-referenced communication circuit as revolutionary. So this is what's unique in his work, his acknowledgement of these three external forces that influence the life cycle of the book. So these are the intellectual influences and publicity, the economic and social conjuncture, and the political and legal sanctions. So in essence, for Darnton, the life of the book is highly contextual. And these external factors determine a lot of things that could and would happen in the life cycle of the book. So these three are described by Darnton as fluid, making this a more accurate visualization. So according to him, symbolic lang daw yung paghiwa-hiwalay nitong tatlo, pero melded together talaga sila sa totoong buhay. So politics, for instance, will be melded with economic conjunctures and the social conjunctures, etc., etc. Now, Darden's work is seminal, and because of that, his model has been adopted by many scholars. But it was not really until the work of Murray and Squires in 2013 that it was situated in the digital landscape, while not discounting these three these three changing external forces influencing the life cycle of the book. So Murray and Squires introduced a few new characters in their model, the literary agent here. And dahil iba na nga yung mundong ginagalawan ng aklat, according to them, during that time, meron na nitong freelancers and outsource agencies. And of course, a product of modern technology here, the device, or as many of us would call them, the e-readers. So another difference is the overlapping in roles in that some authors are also publishers and some publishers are also retailers and distributors. And yes, we do see this nowadays, di ba, may authors na sila mismo yung publishers and may publishers na meron din silang tindahan, they also have a bookstore, thereby making them retailers and distributors. And lastly, new and more direct relationships have been forged, such as those between freelancers and authors and retailers going directly to the device. And we see this with Amazon and its Kindle. So these new relationships are labeled by Murray and Squires as disruption and disintermediation, wherein a technology such as ebooks disrupts the current cycle, causing some players to be disintermediated or eliminated from the game. So two key similarities this has with Darnton are the external forces here, as well as readers becoming authors. So this fading relationship. However, what is problematic in these models is that they dichotomize the print and the digital. So for Darnton, print lang ang in existence in his cycle. For Murray and Squires, digital materials lang ang meron, when the two actually coexist in the contemporary book trade landscape. So this gap provides a strong confirmation that it is high time for Darnton to be applied to such a context. And so in the case of my thesis, and consequently my lecture for this afternoon, I chose to do this in the context of the Philippine book trade. So konting history lang muna tayo, no? So despite being a literate pre-colonial society, the local book industry was said to be born during the Spanish colonial period in the Philippines. But as we know from history, it endured a sluggish progression during this era because of strict censorship laws. However, such political turmoils, as we know, produced good books, such as just two top-of-mind things, the influential Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, books that are still required school readings today. So most of us read this back in high school. So the American regime, which lasted only 4 decades, was apparently the heyday of Philippine publishing, as Spanish was not anymore the language of choice, while English as a language has not arrived yet, making this a great time to publish in the vernacular. However, as observed by historians, the Americans still imposed their own school textbooks. So, of course, these textbooks are in English as part of their quote-unquote benevolent assimilation, or as some would say, indoctrination of the Philippines. So after that came the Japanese occupation, which was labeled a harrowing period in Philippine history, with its harsh censorship laws and the wiping out of libraries, including rare books, unfortunately, which were destroyed through the bombings. But this era, however, did produce a heightened sense of nationalism when it ended. So, in spite of this, post-war Philippines still suffered from reliance on importation for books, a meager book production, and booksellers being mere stationers. But the literary scene at that time was lively. So it was present in newspapers, it was present in magazines. So it was also during this time that the prestigious Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for Literature was established. So this was in the 1950s. And then there came another setback to the industry, which was the proclamation of martial law by then President Ferdinand Marcos, allowing publication and distribution only of materials which reflected positively on the government and the military. But from this, many other books and industry developments arose. So today, ang daming problema ng Pilipinas, ano, aside from the heavy traffic in the metro, possibly ngayong pandemya, hindi na yata ganito ang itsura ng EDSA. I might be wrong because I really haven't been home since 2019. So today, a different set of challenges might be in the offing for publishers in the country. Of course, economic plagues of inflation, ang lumolobong foreign debt, ang hindi may pagkakailang corruption, talent diaspora, and the number of ineffective government decrees to quote-unquote help the publishing industry. So Patricia Mejurilla talked about these things, these laws extensively in her work, Tagalog Bestsellers of the 20th Century, which I also have here. This is a really good book on book history in the Philippines. And this is also based on Mejurilla's PhD thesis. Okay, so in my investigation, I used qualitative methods, specifically interpretive phenomenological analysis, which was coined by Smith, Flowers, and Larkin back in 2009. So I used IPA, which is an inductive method, an inductive methodology described as a qualitative approach committed to the examination of how people make sense of their major life experiences. So, maraming flavors or maraming types ang phenomenology, and it is something that goes beyond and goes deeper than the usual narrative analysis. So, counting history lang muna tayo on phenomenology. So, in the latter part of the 1900s, nomothetic was the dominant methodological school of thought. So many of us here are familiar with nomothetic and ideographic approaches. So yung former, yung nomothetic, ay yung mga more positivist, more quantitative approaches, while the latter are the more interpretive, qualitative methods. So ayun na nga, nomothetic was dominant, but this fellow here, German philosopher Edmund Husserl, felt that there should be other approaches to knowledge production, that surveys and experiments, although they are good, they are useful, they can't be the only ways to find out how stuff works. So he came up with his own method. So Husserl was actually troubled by the detachment of scientific research from the foundation of human experience, and hence he felt the need for rigorous science based on lived experiences. So because of this, Husserl was heralded as the founder of the phenomenological movement. And ngayon, as is the case with many brilliant people, Husserl took on a protege to whom he imparted the ways of his method. So this person here is Martin Heidegger, also of German roots and a philosopher himself. And eventually, he became a seminal phenomenologist, similar to his mentor. So Heidegger, however, rejected some of Husserl's views on phenomenology and developed his own approach grounded on hermeneutics. So for Heidegger kasi yung biases of the human being, tayo bilang tao as are part of the phenomenological research. Pero si Husserl, who was his mentor, ayaw niya nito. So Husserl advocated against the quote-unquote biases. Ako, personally, I am for the Heideggerian method. I believe as social scientists and even as human beings, imposible talaga yung 100% na maisasantabi natin yung biases natin, di ba? And at least to me, the earlier you accept this, the better your research will be. So, iba-iba naman tayo, and I always mention that research is a personal and also a social journey, and walang one single way to do it. So this is just the way that I was able to do it. So heto na nga, this guy, Merleau-Ponty, agrees with Heidegger. So he advocated an intentional relationship between the researcher and the world. So kasali ka as a researcher dun sa magiging findings mo. So such a relationship, according to Merleau-Ponty, is what connects us with the world. And hence, it cannot really be eradicated. It can only be controlled. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. So IPA builds upon the work of these three phenomenologists, and it also follows the stance that those who have experienced the phenomenon are the ones who can best explain it. So tama nga naman. And because this is a Heideggerian phenomenological inquiry, I had to write my epoch. So this epoch is a self-examination of my preconceptions stemming from my previous work experiences in an academic library. So I used to be with the Ateneo Rizal Library for quite some time as a reference librarian. And I also did some marketing during my stint there. So I was with a magazine publishing company. My first job was actually in Summit Media, yung mga Cosmo, FHM, ganyan. I handled copyright issues when I was there. And also my family's involvement in the publishing industry. So we have a very small family-owned business doing foreign publishers representation in the Philippines. And of course, my educational background in library and information science from the UPSLIS. So all these things may and will potentially contribute to biases in my analysis. And by writing them up, I am making myself and the reader of my thesis and my work in general aware that this is where I am coming from, that my thoughts, my preferences, my analysis, the words that I will be using are guided and influenced by these things. And when you come from this angle of awareness, mas mapapalalim mo pa talaga yung analysis mo. So, nowadays kasi nagiging loaded and somehow negative na yung term na bias. So some people even pejoratively call a TV network or an online news source as biased. But sa totoo lang, lahat naman ng tao, may biases talaga tayo. And whatever you write, whatever you don't write, kung sino yung co-author mo, whatever you read, even the topic mismo ng research mo, these are guided by your biases. And that's why we should always keep these in check. So, ayun, after writing my ebook, I went ahead and did in-depth interviews, which is the main method for phenomenological studies, especially IPA. So here, I used very general questions kasi I wanted the data to quote unquote surprise me. So I began with a question, now what's your story? So ganun lang muna. And then I let them talk. And when you do this, you'll find that you'll tick off some of your further questions na as they go along. So dito lang dapat listo tayo talaga na nakikinig kasi this process can be very, very tiring kasi interviews can really range from 60 minutes up to minsan oras talaga depending on the interviewee and also the topic. I've experienced 3-4 hours. So, dapat talaga you really take off yung mga nasabi na nila kasi on their part, medyo nakakainis din naman yun as an interviewee, yung paulit-ulit, diba? So, halatang hindi tayo nakikinig masyado nun. So, when you interview people, you also need to ready yourself in so many different aspects. So, hindi ideal yung back-to-back sa isang araw na marami kang interviewin sa isang araw kasi you really have to devote brain power, EQ, energy, and of course, a lot of attention when you conduct this activity. So people like me who are introverted, talagang isang interview pa lang in a day, pagod na ako nun, I really need to recharge. But of course, iba-iba rin naman ang tao. So this is just my personal experience. So I also employed 2 rounds of coding, in vivo and process coding. So in vivo coding means using the participants' words mismo. So this one, hindi ko pa pina-pressure yung sarili ko na makahanap ng theme. So familiarization lang muna sa data, and then I do process coding. And this one uses gerunds, yung dash ing words like thinking, sharing, having, yung mga ganyan. And dito na ako nakakabuo ng themes for my analysis. So in the course of my analysis, I used the software in vivo. But before I used this software, nag-go old school pen and paper method lang talaga ako, that I print out the transcripts, tapos mamarkahan ko siya with what I was thinking at that time. And ayun, paulit-ulit lang ako nakikinig sa data. Sometimes when I'm walking sa school or nagko-commute, ganyan, naka-earphone ako and I'm really listening to the interview data. So ganun ako na-familiarize to what they were saying, and that's how I first did my analysis. But yes, I did also use computer assisted research. So nasanay na ako sa in vivo because firstly, because that's what the school had, that's what NTU had sa lab, and because yun kasi yung mainstream. But there are of course other software out there that you can use. Right now, my preference is Max QDA. Nung nasubukan ko siya, it's more intuitive and it's more user friendly. But again, this will just boil down to preferences. And these two that I mentioned are proprietary software. So there might be others that are for free that we can use also. So, and then I feel like I need to say this, that the software will assist you, but it will not magically turn you into a great researcher. So, tool lang talaga siya. And just because you have it, magaling ka na kaagad. Or if you don't have it, or you don't have access to it, eh, imposible ka nang mag-conduct ng good research. So that's not really the case. And then earlier, di ba, I was talking about biases. So si Dalberg, who is a fan of the Heideggerian and Marlowe-Pontian brand of phenomenology, so Dalberg coined the term bridling. So ano ba tong bridling? So kung naalala nyo, siguro nagpunta kayo ng Baguio nung bata kayo or something like that. So pag nag-horseback riding, di ba, you pull in the reins of the horse bit. So inihila nyo siya. So that is called bridling. And in the context of biases, you control or you bridle your own biases in your analysis. So another thing that I did to ensure rigor, that my research is a rigorous one, was to have someone do an external audit. So in my case, that was my supervisor, Associate Professor Brendan Luit of NTU. So he's not a librarian. He's not from the publishing industry. And of course, he's not from the Philippines. So magkaiba talaga kami ng background and consequently biases. And this made him a really effective external auditor of my work. Okay, so as mentioned, the first study I conducted was on university publishers, and I will be sharing the results I have for this segment with all of you today. So I also established earlier that the Philippine book trade industry is not lacking in challenges. So in spite of the seemingly grim situation, there are still quite a few privileged individuals. So isa sa kasong ito is the Philippine University Publisher. So I focused on these 3 top-ranking schools in the Philippines according to the QS University rankings. So the Ateneo de Manila University, the University of the Philippines, and De La Salle University. So these 3 have also been active in the publishing scene in post-war Philippines. So I interviewed Rica Bolipata Santos of ADMU, of the Ateneo de Manila University, Janiel Garcia of UP, and David Jonathan Bayot of TLSU. So all 3 of them are PhD holders in the humanities. So like Rica, actually humanities through and through talaga sila kung tutuusin. So Rica Bolipata Santos has a BA in humanities, an MA in English literature, and a PhD in English studies. while Jamie Garcia has a BA in journalism, an MA in comparative literature, and a PhD in English studies. And David Jonathan Bayot has an AB in literature, an MA in language and literature, and a PhD in literature. So they're also teachers in their respective universities. So lahat sila professors. Si Rica Bolipato Santos was also an editor, a consultant, a writer, and a previous bookstore owner. J. Neil Garcia is, of course, many of us are familiar with his work. He's a poet and an award-winning writer. And David Jonathan Bayot is the chair of the De La Salle Literature Department. He's also an editor and he considers himself as a businessman. And as a side note, I conducted this study a few years ago. So right now, Ateneo Press is handled and managed by Karina Bolasco, who used to be with Anvil Publishing and is also like Mamrika, a really remarkable publisher. So even my friends from NUS Press speak very highly of her. So for phenomenological studies, part of the study itself are the participants. So itong interviewees, kaya kasali sila description of who they are and what they do dito sa work ko. I also employed, if any of you are interested, the constant comparative method in that I analyzed one case first. So I started with Amrika here. And then I constantly compared the following cases with that single one. Okay, so I will be sharing with you 5 key findings on their data, beginning with their belongingness in a closed, cultured circuit. So their educational and professional backgrounds accord them a belongingness to the elite circle of academia. So they all are PhD holders in literature. They are all professors, they're all writers, and they're all editors. And thereby, they are publishing works by people of their own kind. Kasi sino ba nagpa-publish sa university presses? So, our academics, di ba? Or scholars. So, kumbaga mga taong kahuwangis nila profile-wise. So, Greco, Milliot, and Wharton in 2014 likewise added that faculty members often publish their works in university presses to secure employment or to advance in academia. And further marked that authorities in such fields, such as the deans and vice presidents, perceive university presses as better than their commercial counterparts. So this is actually reminiscent of Robert Escarpit's concept of the culture group, which is an elite group who received enough intellectual training to become barometers of literary taste. So this group, according to Escarpit, forms a closed caste. So if you noticed, this finding involved analyzing their backgrounds, not just their work, their words, sorry. So ganun ang phenomenology. So very heavily contextual in that the contexts of the individuals are also part of the data. And you won't usually see this being done in other methods. So here we see their interview data reiterate what their profiles were telling me, that their publishing and academic roles were feeding into each other, as Santos here narrates, and I quote, it's a teacher thing. It's almost as if what I do in the classroom is the same as what I do here, which is everything is a teaching moment. So Garcia of UP opined similarly, stating that I am a teacher, so I enjoy teaching. So being in the university is a hat with many hats inside it. I'm just being part of a university that is working towards the lot of the country. So kay David, Jonathan Bayat naman of DLSU, medyo iba ng konti in that the business side feeds his teaching hat. So he says, and I quote, I have always seen business to be a part of me. So is that something so different from my teaching? I don't think so, because when I do teach, I really think of myself as a businessman selling the ideas to the students. So my second finding is that unlike in Europe and North America, there are fewer, if at all, formal courses or apprenticeship programs in the field of publishing in the Philippines. So they have to resort to other means to learn the trade. So sa US kasi, sa Europe, sa Canada, there are courses that people can take to become a legit publisher. So we really don't have that clear defined path in the Philippines. So wala ring licensure for publishers unlike sa ating mga librarians. So among many, many other evidences of publishing being less professionalized in the Philippines. So our publishers, at least the university publishers, were left to their own devices. So they had to learn how to become a publisher through different means. So such as Bayat here of PLSU coming from a business family and using his past learnings to run the press. So he told me, and I quote, "I'm a full 100%, 101% Chinese. I grew up in a business family and I have been into many businesses. I've been into jewelry. I've been running a fast food store. I used to raise orchids, so I have always seen business to be a part of me." So si Ma'am Rika naman of Ateneo, she came from a family of printers, thereby learning the ropes of print production. So she stated that, and I quote, "The history of that is my parents' business was really a publishing firm that turned into security printing. My father would do the printing and the computerization of results, but when we were small and young, we were a printing press and we did literary magazines. So I know how production works," end quote. So si J. Neil Garcia naman of UP, he was familiarized to the process through publishing with the press regularly since 1996 pa. So he explained, and I quote, "When your book is being processed, you make several trips there," referring to the press. So you have to talk to your editor, and then you talk about the cover design. And so I got to see their operations. And then the former director was my friend. So over merienda, she would tell me about issues, problems. So entering the job, I was not completely ignorant, end quote. So very, very informal yung kay Janila Garcia, no? But obviously also, it was quite informative kasi kahit over merienda lang, yung UP Press under his wing is up and running. And thirdly, I found that they have less commercial pressure stemming from a unique mandate. The mandate of Philippine university publishers is not just different from other local commercial publishers, it also slightly deviates from current practices of university presses situated in the West. So, university presses in the West kasi they are mandated to make money. So, yung press, kailangan kumita ng university presses nila in the West. So, ibang kaso sa Pilipinas. So, for instance, here, tanggap nila that it's really possible that nobody will buy or appreciate the book right now. But it still needs to be published because it is an investment in knowledge capital. So, sabi nga ni Rica Balipata Santos of Ateneo, and I quote, "Sometimes there is that possibility that the book needs to be published, but nobody will buy it. And you invest in knowledge capital. It will translate to something for the country and something for the world." So very forward thinking, and you have to really see the big picture when you're a university publisher in the Philippines. So Janelle Garcia shares the same opinion, stating, and I quote, "The mandate is to publish excellent Filipino books that are scholarly and literary, and basically to make profit is not part of the mandate," end quote. So Garcia further revealed that they can afford to do so thanks to the salary subsidy from the government, as UP, as we know, is a state university. So he says, and I quote, "Our employees here are getting their salaries from the government. We only use the income from the sales of our books for operational expenses to produce more books and to pay for electricity and also equipment." So he explained that this placed them in a better position than commercial publishers who had to pay for everything using revenue from sales. However, embracing this mandate did not come naturally. So for some of them, it was acquired over time, and sometimes it takes upper management to help them realize this mandate. So for Mamrika of Ateneo, for instance, kinausap na talaga siya ng then President Father Jet Villarin na, hey, why are you stressing yourself out to make money? Why are you worried about this when I myself am not? So, hindi naman yan ang mandato ko sa'yo. And that's when she realized na, oo nga, the press really hasn't made money in 10 years. Yet here we are, buhay pa rin ang press. So, I really shouldn't expect to make money right now. So, unlike their Western counterparts who ventured into trade and regional publishing in light of monetary pursuits, those in the Philippines did so to expand the borders of their territory. It wasn't really to acquire more profits or more money. So, as Garcia of UP notes, they operate on a different mandate, which is to publish excellent scholarly and literary Filipino books, and they're not really out there to produce profit. So, this is reflective of their heightened cultural role and is also evocative of Pierre Bourdieu's field of cultural production. So, this might be familiar to many of us. So, Bourdieu says that products which are highly cultural will not appeal to the masses, but to a different and a much smaller demographic. However, our publishers are still cognizant of their two roles as publishers. The first being the cultural one, and the second being a commercial one. That even though their primary mandate is to fulfill the former, they still note their responsibility to fulfill the latter. So, as Garcia notes, the mandate is clear, but you cannot be stumbling foolishly making decisions you know would be a complete waste of money, right? So he keeps this in mind as he does his day-to-day decision making in the UP Press. So similar to many other industries, university presses established their own niches. So as Santos reported, the Ateneo Press is known for its social science publications primarily. So we've stuck to our own expertise. So why will I compete with UP, which has a very good literary publication niche? So they very much stayed within their own kingdoms, at least as far as Ateneo is concerned. So on the discussion of establishing their niche, David Jonathan Bayot of De La Salle disclosed that for him, it seemed like they were in a disadvantaged position compared to Ateneo and UP kasi nauna na yung dalawa eh. So he thought, and I quote, they have already contacted all these big name Filipino authors. I thought, what's really the point of fighting over this little corpus of things? So it's a really, really small market. So I thought if I really wanted to participate, I'll have to niche myself elsewhere. And then I thought of another thrust of the university, which is internationalization. So if you really want to internationalize, you want people to know what DLSU is, and you cannot just keep publishing the Philippine authors. So the Philippine academics will know about them, but foreign universities will never have heard of them. So that is what I did I made the initiative to target foreign authors. So kaiba the LSU Press in that they also publish foreign authors. And the case is also different for UP in that it already established its niche in the humanities, and then later they decided to diversify. So as Janiel Garcia narrated, and I quote, I've tried to sort of balance the humanities and literary titles against the scholarly ones. So I think we've been putting out more, trying to put out more scholarly books coming from as diverse disciplines as possible. So they were diversifying from their very core, which is the humanities. So now we're putting out a book of medical parasitology. We have books on economics. We have books in natural sciences. So we're trying to sort of even the balance, end quote. And finally, my fifth finding was that they went digital, but sometimes they went digital and then they went back to print. So the publishers related how they have dealt with different projects over time, and one of the more recent ones is their exploration of ebooks. So finally, we are modern, as Santos of Ateneo exclaimed. So she clarified that the rationale behind going digital was because she wanted to be distributed abroad. And she also told me about her at the time, recent experience attending the Book Expo America in New York. And here I quote, because when I was at the book fair last year, this was around 2016, if I'm not mistaken, my first feeling was that nobody wants to talk to me because you still have to ship my books. It seemed like I had no currency there. So I said the next time I go, which was this year, I need to have some ebooks with me so they would be interested to carry me, end quote. And a similar perspective was communicated by Janelle Garcia, who opined that we've sort of adopted the model of American publishing houses, which is to actually co partner first because you cannot transform existing academic presses overnight into e publishers. So that means basically creating a new department and having training and basically expanding operations. So the best is to actually co partner, so you produce the content and you get a digital distributor to market it globally through an ebook format. So you kind of tap the market already and you basically don't incur too many expenses in the process for the moment, end quote. So here naman, the turn of events was quite different for David Jonathan Bayot, who relate how they went from print to electronic and then back to print again. So he says, and I quote, it's not selling. So it's in Amazon, it's in Apple iTunes, it's in Kobo, it's in Barnes& and Noble, but it doesn't sell. So he says the sales are low, and he knows because he gets a monthly report. So every month he'll just get one copy sold. Next month, another copy. The following month, another copy. So, hindi naman pwede yung pa-isa-isa lang, di ba? So, he surmised that it's really not selling in the ebook market. And he ceased ebook production at that time. So, sabi niya sa akin, people explained to him that the reason why it doesn't sell is because ebooks, just like print books, also need marketing. So, hindi mo siya pwedeng ilagay lang out there and then expect to really magically have a market. So, the ebook business naman for Santos and Garcia of Ateneo and UP were actually at the infant stage pa at the time of the interview. So they were unable to comment on how it has been working for them so far in terms of sales or whatnot. So wala pa sila at that level. So those are the 5 key findings I found based on one single study that I did. And based on these, I transposed my findings into the context of Robert Darnton's communication circuit. So putting the differences revealed by my data into perspective, it can be surmised that this version of Darnton's model is more reflective of the nature of Philippine book trade, at least from the point of view of university publishers. So just as a comparison, ito yung sa akin for Philippine university presses. Ito yung original ni Darnton. Ito yung sa akin, ito yung kay Darnton. So there really are quite a few differences. So similar to Darnton, I also acknowledge the two-way relationship here between authors and publishers and printers. However, unlike Murray and Squires, who disintermediated printers, so tinanggal nila to sa model nila, my data had me keep them in the model as outsourcing printing jobs is still the norm in the Philippine context. And while before they maintained their own printeries, this ceased to be practical for them due to changes in the Philippine economy. So medyo humirap ang buhay. And that's what influenced their decision. So, in the narratives of Philippine university publishers, I found that in the early days of their operations, all 3 presses chose to do their own printing in-house. So, meron silang printeries within their own operations. So, this negates the existence of an external printer in Darnton's model kasi they do their own printing back in the day. However, due to changes in the economy, these practices ceased to be practical for them and hence forced the publishers to revert to outsourcing their printing needs. So as Garcia recounted, it was just not efficient because you have so many options for printers. If you want to go for the best quality that's cost effective and cheap, you have to bid it out. And that's the model now for most presses. So si Bayat naman of DLSU told me that the losses incurred from the purchasing of these expensive, really huge printing machinery were actually one of the causes of the financial downfall of DLSU's press. So for a time, actually, DLSU press was nalugi and nagsara sila for a time before it was reopened years after. So Garcia likewise rendered an in-house printery as just a load on your back. So this finding suggests that printers have initially been disintermediated in that they were eliminated by the publishers by having their own printeries in-house, but are now once again in operation. So binalik sila. So the role of the outsourced printers came back because of practicality reasons. So this also suggests that there was a possibility of a reversal of this intermediation. So pwede kang matanggal, may chapuera sa circuit, but you can still also come back. However, we must note that this reversal occurred for printers, not because of their own proactivity. So wala namang ginawa yung printers for them to be back in the game for university presses. Instead, it happened due to changes in the economic conjuncture, thus reinforcing Darnton's external forces that affect the life cycle of the book. So in my version of Darnton Circuit, I have also acknowledged, similar to Murray and Squires, the overlaps in roles. In that, university publishers are also published authors, as we saw their profiles earlier, and they are also booksellers, as well as the norm is to have a bookstore attached to their presses. So if you've been to UP Press, bago kayo makarating sa offices nila, meron silang tindahan, they have a bookstore. Ateneo Press is it's the same thing. May mga shelves. Nandun you can really pick and then you can do your own book shopping there. And the same can be said for De La Salle University Press. So another key point I wish to mention is that while Darnton established that readers faded into authors as some readers become authors themselves, I challenge this notion as correct, but it's still rather incomplete. So as my results reveal, publishers are also readers using their knowledge of literary works as a major selling point of their credibility as a publisher. So at this point, they can actually be labeled as authors turned publishers, once printers, became booksellers, and also readers. So are publishers readers merely because in this case, they are also authors? And more importantly, is the fading relationship with readers exclusive to authors? So obviously, ang sagot dito ay a resounding no. So I can answer that very easily at this juncture. But to which other players do readers fade into then? And to what extent does this fading happen? So those are still two hanging questions here. So for each of these 4 studies that I did for my thesis, I took an interpretive phenomenological stance, and these 4 are published already in journals. So if you're interested, you can read my work. No pressure, kung gusto niya lang. And I also looked at and contextualized Darnton for each of these. And sa bawat isa, iba-iba talagang itsura ng model ni Darnton. So the model looks very different for university publishers. When I contextualized for comics publishers, iba na naman ang itsura. For self-publishers, iba na naman ang itsura. And the same can be said for children's publishers. So iba-iba. Iba-iba talaga sila. And so before I end my presentation, and also before I ended my thesis, I asked myself these 2 questions. So the first is, so what? Ano naman ngayon? Oo, you found all these findings, ano ngayon? And to answer that, I go back to what I have achieved in my thesis and my work, thanks to Darnton. And so it is easy to assume that at the end of these 4 studies that I did, I will be presenting a holistic, consolidated communication circuit to represent my findings in the Philippine context. However, I found and offered a better alternative, which was four separate independent models that refused to participate in an oversimplification of the industry. So it's really a very complex trade, ang print book industry, that you really can't just um, make up a model and say that this applies to its entirety. So the publishing industry is highly contextual, and I found that there is no one size fits all in its treatment. Magkakaiba talaga sila. So apart from lessons for publishers, I also offer lessons for four other groups of people. So for librarians, unang-una, that we may be more knowledgeable in our dealings with publishers. So for readers or book buyers, and kasali dito some of us who are in acquisitions, that they may be able to make more informed decisions, not only on which books to buy, but how to source them best to support the industry. So parang palugi na nga, not mandated to make money na nga, huwag na nating asahan or pressure for further discounts, especially if we have the funds naman. So this is just one way that we can keep the circuit flowing, a simple way that will help our fellow characters in the book industry to keep doing what they're doing. And consequently, they can feed us with more materials so that we can keep doing what we are doing as librarians. So another thing that librarians can learn from this, and kasali ako dito, is that may niches pala ang university presses sa Pilipinas. So, it is highly likely na dahil belong sa niche ng, for instance, social sciences sa Ateneo, kaya dito nag-publish ng yung author ng work niya. So, for example, ito, this work by May Horilla, she's a UP faculty, but she published in Ateneo de Manila University Press. It's likely that it's not because she was rejected by UP, but dahil lang yung subject niya is part of that niche in Ateneo. So, ganun lang siya usually. So, in the same way, kapag halimbawa meron tayong faculty na nagpapatulong sa atin maghanap ng venue for their work, I know more common yung nagpapahanap ng journal na may good impact factor. Our awareness of the niches can help us make a more informed recommendation for our patrons. So these are just a few top of mind things that I can identify at the moment. Of course, there may be others. Kasi I have been out of touch na rin sa practice, to be honest. The last time that I really practiced as a librarian was back in 2014. So those of us who are really into the profession, in practicing the profession at the moment, can think of other applications as well. Okay? So for administrators or educators naman, that they may consider courses on publishing, kasi at the moment, halos wala talaga. So ang usual lang ay yung offerings ng NBDB na pa-workshop, but even those come by very, very rarely and limited din yung position. So baka naman pwede tayong magkaroon ng elective, kasi it will also be beneficial for our librarians to be knowledgeable in these things. And then lastly, for the government and even for non-government organizations, hopefully my findings can help them in their pursuit of supporting the book trade industry. And also for my contribution to theory, I also offer a critique of Darnton's work. And I start with the external forces, which I found were not as fluid as he had earlier claimed. Magkakahiwalay talaga sila. There are some that are only affected by economic conjuncture, such as the printers. Wala namang kinalaman ng political and legal sanctions doon. So they're really compartmentalized, at least in the context of the Philippines. And another one is the rendering of roles as mutually exclusive. So for Darnton, author ka lang, publisher ka lang, printer ka lang, reader ka lang. So in fact, overlaps actually exist. So nakita na rin to ni Murray and Squires in 2013. And lastly, the claim that generally books pass through the circular continuous process is not always applicable. So in all four of my studies, not once did I close a circuit, much less in a cyclical manner. And for the second question, what now? So now that I know all these, ano nang gagawin ko ngayon? Ano nang silbi ng itong mga kaalamang ito para sa akin? So my answer to this question is my sharing of these findings to those in the field of librarianship. So kagaya ng what I'm doing at the moment. So pinag-uusapan tayo ng publishers. I have seen data on this. My interviewees have shared with me some positive and negative interactions with librarians so they know how we operate, but can we really truly say the same for them? Do we as librarians know how they operate? So kaya, and I keep mentioning this to Director Von Totanes, napaka-lonely namin sa field that intersects librarianship with book history. And although we do have excellent, really excellent Filipino book historians, like I keep mentioning Patricia Mejorilla and even Ravi Sonico, dalawa pa lang kami ni Von, as far as we know, na librarian but also book historian. So imagine, di ba binanggit ko sa inyo kanina, iba't ibang editions ng iisang title ng aklat, nakagawa siya ng isang buong PhD dissertation. Eh, ilan ba ang aklat sa buong Filipiniana universe since the beginning of time pa? So napakarami. And ako naman, yes, I looked at publishers, but as I mentioned, due to time, resources, and even brain power constraints, I was only able to cover a few niches. So, takot na takot ako nung mag-over sa studies ko ng PhD. Ayoko talagang mag-extend kasi pag nag-extend ka, magbabayad ka ng tuition. So, it's not cheap. Kaya talagang highly motivated akong matapos on time. So, marami pang different kinds of publishers. And as I mentioned, I did not even touch on textbooks. So, meron din tayong religious book publishers. Although we are a predominantly Catholic country in the Philippines, marami pang relihiyon sa Pilipinas. May evangelical Christians, we have our Muslim brothers and sisters, merong Iglesia ni Cristo, etc., etc. And all these religions produce print materials. And basta marami pang characters sa communication circuit. We have our authors, we have printers, shippers, booksellers, readers, and meron ding book pirates. 'Di ba sa shopping center, sa Recto, marami nito. And it's also an industry of its own. So meron din tayong publishers of newspapers, of magazines, etc., etc. So there really is still a lot of work that can be done and should be done. Kaya binabahagi ko itong aking mumunting contribution, my tiny, tiny, tiny dent in knowledge production para sana ay may ibang ma-curious at ma-inspire na oo nga ano, pwede ko nga palang imbestigahan itong mga bagay na to as a librarian and bilang isang information professional. And if you're interested, pwede natin itong pag-usapan and be very happy to pay it forward kasi napakarami po talagang tumulong sa akin nung nag-PhD ako, even before yung mga nagbigay ng mga reference letters, and even after nung graduate na ako. Mula sa pagkuha ng respondents, I really relied heavily on the kindness of others. So sila Kauri of UST, si Donna ng De La Salle, si Veron, she was instrumental sa Wattpad self-publishing chapter ko. Sila Ma'am Elvie, si Emang, si Karina for documents, may Ninang Lourdes, may Ninang Rhea for giving me yung mga kailangan ko mga letters. People in the publishing industry, my librarian friends, sila Pañeros and Bañeras, Mami G for being my support system, magulang ko, aking butihing asawa. As in, sobrang dami. It's really unbelievable, and it really took a village to finish my own thesis. So I really share this accomplishment with a lot of people. So kung iisa-isahin ko, alam ko marami pa akong hindi nabanggit. Magmumukha talagang acknowledgement section itong aking lecture. So ayun, this is why I'd be more than willing to help you out sa abot ng aking makakaya if you're interested in this subject matter. Okay, and with that, I would end my presentation. Sana maumpisahan natin ang usapan sa Q&A. Huwag po sana kayong mahiyang magtanong. And maraming salamat po sa oras at sa inyong attention at sa inyong pakikinig. See you sa Q&A.
Maraming salamat, Kay. And thank you so much for sharing this with us also. No, you have made the complex nature of university presses visible, and I'm now curious to read what would be the case for the comics industry, the other industry as well. And I'm sure our audience are also curious too. As a matter of fact, there are already several questions waiting for you. But before that, I just would like to thank those who just tuned in. Again, this is the UP SLIS webinar series organized by the UP School of Library and Information Studies. To our audience, if you have any questions for our speaker, you can go to slido.com and type in the code PRINT PH. That's PRINT PH. You could also use the QR code shown on the screen to go to our questions page. Please check the previously posted questions and the vote questions you would like to be prioritized. You can also comment on the questions if you have similar stories or experiences. Right now, let me give some important announcements. The latest issue of the Philippine Journal of Librarianship and Information Studies, the journal publication of UP SLIS, will be released very soon. This special issue will feature a compendium of articles on LIS education in the Philippines. Watch out for that on the PHJLIS website at phjlis.org. You can also view its previous issues at phjlis.org, and articles are available free for download. You may also submit your articles by logging into the same website. If you have any inquiries, you may send an email to editor@phjlis.org. We would also like to thank those who already purchased the UP SLIS Coffee Table book. For those of you who have no copies yet, you can pre-order for our next print run by going to bit.ly/SLISCTB. For those of you who have fond memories of your UP SLIS stay or ILS or ILIS, we also want to know your best, funniest, weirdest, oddest, scariest, sappiest memories in SLIS through a project called #IRemember. So if you have something that you want to share, please go to iremember.upslis.info. You might also want to check out our 60th anniversary online exhibition at 60.upslis.info. Sabay sa pagdiriwang ng buwan ng wikang pambansa, malugod na ibinabahagi sa inyo ng paaralan ng Aralin sa Aklatan at Impormasyon ang isang exhibition tungkol kay Lope K. Santos. Si Lope K. Santos ang hinihirang na ama ng gramatikong Filipino. Ang exhibition na ito ay ginawa ng aming MLIS graduate na si Marlene Patron bilang bahagi ng kanyang terminal na proyekto sa kursong Masterado ng Agham Pang-aklatan at Impormasyon. Itinatampok sa exhibition ang malikhaing paggamit ng archival material tungkol kay Lope K. Santos upang lumikha ng naratibo sa kanyang buhay at upang tuklasin ang kanyang papel sa paghubog ng Filipino bilang wikang pambansa. Maaring makita ang exhibition sa archive.upslis.info/Lope K. Santos. That's archive.upslis.info/Lope K. Santos. Also, the 2021 UP SLIS Research Bootcamp is open for LIS researchers and early career professionals. This year's research bootcamp is entitled Information and Knowledge Research with Dr. Michael Olson and will include lectures and workshops on developing research proposals in the field of information and knowledge research. This will be held online and is 100% free. So if you want to apply, please go to bit.ly/2021-SLIS-bootcamp. The deadline of application is tomorrow, that's August 5th, 11:59 p.m. And also, to ensure that every BLIS student is equipped with the required tools or gadgets for remote learning, the Kaagapay project for UP BLIS students of the UP Library Science Alumni Association or the UP LSAA is still ongoing. This is in support of the program of UP System, Kaagapay sa Pag-aaral ng mga Scholar ng Bayan. You may donate in cash or in kind to help our BLIS students who may be struggling with remote learning. You may send your inquiries to uplsaa.inc@gmail.com. And finally, the UP SLIS is still accepting donations for the construction and renovation of our new SLIS building. Here is your opportunity to contribute to UP SLIS and LAS education in the country. For your donations or other inquiries, you may contact us via email at admin@slis.upd.edu.ph. And also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our Twitch TV, and like our Facebook page, UPSLIS, where this video is currently being streamed. That's UPSLIS on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. Shoutout din sa ating mga viewers. A lot of them from Quezon City, and I believe a lot of them are friends of Kay. Maraming fans si Kay ngayon. Okay, so at this point, I believe, as I mentioned earlier, we have several questions waiting for you, Kay. So again, maraming salamat for sharing your thesis with us. I would like to start with these two questions. Pagsabayin ko na sila kasi medyo similar. This is about your thesis, about your interview. So after your in-depth interview, were there instances that you went back to your interviews to clarify some points? And also, when you're transcribing the interview, do you translate the Tagalog words to English before you coded them? I guess yung mga audience natin, curious sila how you did your yung methods mo.
Okay, so yung first question, definitely, actually, in-anticipate ko na siya na magkakaroon ako ng follow-up question. So even before I ended the interview, I asked them, okay lang po ba if I'll communicate with you via email or through another medium to clarify some points? And meron din talagang interviewee na segurista that she really wanted to see muna yung transcripts and she wanted to review them muna before she signed the consent form. So, understandably kasi yung aspect na yun is a very commercial aspect of publishing kaya okay naman, wala namang naging problema and she signed it eventually. Tapos, sorry, where's the second question? Nawala na sa ano ko sa feed.
Yeah, sure. The second question is about yung pag-code mo. Do you have to translate the Tagalog to English or how did you manage that?
Actually, for my experience, since it's a very parang top level na really higher management yung aking in-interview, most of them are really comfortable speaking English. So kahit minsan tinatagalog ko sila, ang sagot nila sa akin ay English. So in that sense, very, very minimal yung kailangan kong i-translate. But if I remember correctly, I did not translate everything. So I coded muna lahat and actually I plugged it muna sa article and that's when I just translated yung Tagalog words na very, very minimal lang naman. But of course, it's case to case. Baka iba yung maging experience ng ibang tao.
I see. Thank you so much, Kay. There's another question here and I believe you've discussed this lengthily actually in the latter part of your talk. You mentioned about poking holes in Darnton's work, and you cited those examples. Siguro, I'm just curious, no? Kasi yung questions dito, what are these holes? If you can reiterate or an example of one. And also curious din ako na yung naging reaction ni Darnton.
Ano siya, actually, sige, I'll start with that. Mabait siya talaga. So, very down to earth na ako kinapalan ko talaga yung mukha ko na i-email ko nga, sabihin ko, thank you, your work has been instrumental to my work and I finished my dissertation thanks to you, but these are my critiques of your work. So, nagpasalamat talaga siya and he acknowledged na, oo nga, I did not see it that way kasi nga magkaiba tayo ng perspective. So, ayun, ang siguro pinakamalaking hole lang ni Darnton. And this is also my main critique dun sa Marshall McLuhan's The Gutenberg Galaxy. It's that they're very reductionist. And this is very common for privileged positions na they state that because it is this way in this place. So it's kay Darnton, meron siyang circular na circuit. It will be this way in other places. But actually, that's one of my motivations then by to apply Darnton to our context, to the Philippine context, to really see na parang my hunch was that imposibleng one-to-one, parehong-pareho ang nangyayari sa 18th century Britain to the 21st century in the Philippines. So, ayun, that's one of my main critiques of Darnton.
Oo nga, napakaganda especially when you presented the model with the overlaps and also yung mga iba pang complex relationships. So, thank you for presenting your model, Kay. Meron pa tayong mga questions na dumadating dito. Ito naman about the phenomenology method that you employed. What other kinds of questions, medyo mahirap yata sagutin to, what other kinds of questions or topics would IPA be appropriate for?
Okay. Like what I mentioned, maraming brands of phenomenology. So yung kay Husserl, which is the original talaga, it's very descriptive. So most people who use this method, yung parang big or explosive moments in their lives lang. So if I'm going to contextualize, it's publishing, probably their move to ebook production from print to ebook. Suddenly they will shift, or probably the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are really big things. So yung IPA, it really delves on the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day experiences. So, ayun, who would have thought na yung pagmamerienda kasama ng former director sa UP Press, yung pagtitinda ng orchids, pagmamay-ari ng Jollibee franchise nung tiga DLSU Press, and yung pagkakasakit ni Ma'am Rica of Ateneo Press just because of the pressures. You really don't think of these things as significant. But that's the beauty of IPA. Yung day-to-day lived experiences are important and deemed significant. So if I were to answer that question, what kind of questions or topics would IPA be appropriate for? Sa librarianship, araw-araw natin ginagawa, di ba? Day in, day out, people in the counter, sa reference counter. These are seemingly mundane things. But if you really look at them up close, meron din pala silang sinasabi sa atin, and meron din silang pwedeng nating paghugutan ng information, knowledge, and even wisdom. So, ayun, marami ang IPA. Actually, ang IPA ay ginagamit usually for nursing and medical fields. So, people who are experiencing pain on a day-to-day level, yun yung mga nakikita ko. Pero in terms of publishing, wala pa akong nakita, at least in the time of writing of my thesis, na na-apply. So, I thought, pwede naman sa publishing, and most definitely pwede rin sa practice of librarianship. Ayun.
Ayun, that sounds really exciting kasi this is very helpful, especially sa mga nakikinig ngayon. If you're a frontliner na mga librarians, I think this is very helpful for them. Thank you, Kay. There's another question here, still about IPA. So it is asking about privilege and power. How do you address the privilege and power coming from those who can conduct IPA and those who cannot? Does IPA perpetuate power and privilege? Yung kanyang
Uh,
question.
very loaded ito, no? So I need to tread carefully. So actually, in my opinion, conducting research in itself, regardless of method, is in itself a privilege and a sort of power. So although sometimes it may not feel that way na privilege ito, most days you really have to tell ourselves na I get to do this. I get to do a master's degree. I get to go to college and do a thesis. I get to do a PhD instead of I have to do this. So we have to really recognize na privileged position na tayo in itself. And then power, although it's also the same na your words kind of have power, na yung research mo ay babasahin ng iba with some degree of authority. So, I guess to answer this question, privileged and powered position talaga ang researcher. And siguro for more practicality, those who can conduct IPA and those who cannot. So this is really a very personal decision also. So my supervisor was not a fan of IPA, mostly because he prefers document analysis, and I am not that way. I prefer yung lived experiences. I really enjoy interviewing. I find joy sa interviewing more than delving sa archives or other documents. So it's also more than privilege and power. It's also a personal decision. Kung bagay ba ito sa'yo based sa pagkakakilala mo sa sarili mo. So yun.
Salamat, Kay. Ito, I remember at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned something about your view on research na being pragmatist and
Oo.
yung view na yon. Would you say now yung malaki ba yung nabago sa'yo when you took your PhD regarding your view? How did you stumble upon the phenomenology?
Definitely, ibang-iba na ang so siyempre meron pa rin tamang matitira, pero I have been really shaped by, the NTU education na I keep telling my husband. Iba na yung pag-iisip ko noon sa ngayon. So actually, and my supervisor knows this, and I keep teasing him about this, na fifth proposal ko ito na inaccept niya. So I was, so natanggap ako sa NTU, and then when I got there, he said, ay ayoko tong proposal mo, hindi ito maganda kasi hot topic lang ito. So hindi ko na babanggitin yung topic sa akin. Hot topic lang ito and it will not be a classic. So that time, parang hindi ko masyadong gets yun until the fifth time na book history and librarianship, this is unique and this is something that I can do. So, ayun, it really is a journey. Tapos, yung pragmatism, it also involves yung pagpili mo ng method. Kasi ako, um, uh, very, very basic. I would say yung baseline understanding ko ng quantitative research. And it's not something that I really enjoy doing compared to qualitative work. So, and I keep telling this to other people na mahirap talagang tapusin ang isang thesis in itself. Mas mahirap pa kapag wala talaga yung puso mo dun sa ginagawa mo. So, ayun, really, it's part of being pragmatic na hindi mo kailangan pahirapan ang sarili mo. There are ways to ayoko naman sabihin enjoy, but to be less stressed about certain things, and that involves even thesis writing. Yung sana nasagot ko yung tanong mo.
Naman, and that's definitely good advice, especially to those who are currently pursuing their research, their thesis, no? Okay, meron pa tayong mga questions dito. So eto siguro, you also mentioned this, but maybe we can reiterate to the audience why the two-pronged approach in your study.
Okay, the first one was really my supervisor and I at the time felt that this is an industry that needs to be documented. It needs to be talked about in academia. Kasi so far during my lit review, ganyan, puro newspaper articles. There's one book that tried to summarize the history of Philippine publishing, but it was critiqued heavily in academic circles by as being merely a coffee table book na puro pictures lang. So we felt na, oh, kailangan natin to pag-usapan. Somebody needs to write it. And that person can, and at that time, was me. And then yung second is the two-pronged approach is I really wanted to contribute to theory and I really wanted to challenge Darnton at that time. So yun yung second, so sabi ko, di-document na natin, itodo na natin, i-apply na natin kay Darnton. So that was my motivation.
Okay, and related to that, this next question, sabi niya, your thesis seemed to be outstanding and well written. I wonder what the questions were asked you when you defended it to a panel. Did they find holes in your study?
Ay, salamat naman po. Hindi bola to, ha? Actually, nung nag-defend ako ng thesis, I was 5 or 6 months pregnant. So, my memory, nag-umpisa na yung mom brain ko during that time. But one thing that I really, really remember was, I failed to communicate one point properly in that it sounded like I was being antagonistic to quantitative methods. But really, I just wanted to say that it can't be the only method. And I was quoting Silverman, who's also a very prolific quantitative methods na writer. So, ayun, yun ang naging isa sa mga major na comments. But even before the defense comes, it will be highly tested by your supervisor. I-check na yan, you will really poke holes. And then even before your presentation, your committee will also give you comments. So I wouldn't want to say that it's a formality, but sa defense, kumbaga, na-address mo na most of the questions and ayun, kaya very, very few, if I remember correctly, nung defense.
Maraming salamat. Oo, makinig talaga sa advisor, di ba? At There are some questions here. Doc K, did you consider including ebook aggregators for licensing access to works only and ebook sellers in your models?
The short answer to that is no, and another answer to that is not yet. So, I believe this is for Sir Fernan Dizon kung wala naman yata ibang kilalang Fernan. Kung gusto niyo po puwede natin tignan. We can collaborate on this thing.
Yes, I forgot to mention, in-indicate niya pala yung name niya. So this is also from the same person, si Fernan. Doc, how many coding cycles did you do to come up with your findings of your study?
So, I did two types of coding, which is the in vivo and process coding. But in terms of coding rounds and cycles, I would say countless. Kasi even as I listen to the data, even as I was there in front of the interviewee, may nagko-code na ako sa utak ko na parang, ito pwede itong theme, so I would write it down. So, really, really countless. Siguro maliliit na coding snippets in a day, parang gano'n. I would say it's like that. But in terms of the types of coding, I used in vivo and process coding lang.
Alright. Maraming salamat. I hope yung mga audience natin, for especially those who submitted questions, they were addressed. And if you still have questions, we still have a few more minutes. Siguro ito na lang, Kay, for the researchers and for even the practicing librarians who are listening right now, what would be your advice if they want to embark on a study and they want to employ IPA?
First of all, you have to know yourself kung ano ba ang iyong, are you a positivist? Are you more interpretive? You really have to know yourself kasi research is a really very personal journey. So, how do you want to answer questions? Gusto mo ba using numbers? Gusto mo ba using words? Are you comfortable in conducting interviews? Kasi you can still be interpretive, you can still be a qualitative researcher, but not do IPA. So, as I mentioned, merong mas gusto yung document analysis, merong gumagamit ng photographs, meron din gumagamit ng yung mga printed na discourse, yung mga speeches. So, you really have to start by knowing yourself. So, alamin mo muna sino ka ba talaga and what do you really want to do. So, dito na papasok yung biases natin. So, probably, if it's part of, like ako, my history sa family namin na merong involvement sa publishing industry. So, these things you really have to consider before you jump and say na, itong gusto kong gawin. So, ayun. But don't be afraid na kailangan maging perfect naman. So, it really is a working project. And even yung work ko, it looked very differently on year one and the year that I graduated. So, ayun. Yung enemy kasi ng pagiging tapos ay yung perfectionism. So, huwag naman tayo ganun.
Okay. Meron pang mga humabol na questions, and with the time we can still address these last two. Okay, you have the question here is, you happen to interview those from big university publishers. Was there a point when expansion was mentioned in terms of encouraging local universities to participate in publishing? Do you think it's the publisher's responsibility to approach professors, writers on how to participate?
Local universities to participate in publishing. Okay. So, good publishers really know how to hunt for good writers and good content. So, yun na nga yung point of contention ni David Bayot of DLSU na kasi nagsara yung press and then bumukas ulit under his management. So, nakuha na ni UP Press, nakuha na ni Ateneo Press yung mga big name Filipino authors. So, ang ginawa niya, he had to niche himself somewhere else. So, nag-publish siya ng foreign authors who might be of interest to scholars in the Philippines. So, ayun, it also is a very business thing. Kasi nga, bakit ka pa magkikipag-agawan? Kanila na yun, they have already signed those authors. And then, yeah, big university publishers, actually, in all honesty, and this was I brought this up in my defense. Ang NTU ay walang university press. And that's one thing that they can learn, even in a developed country setting. And NTU has funding naman. They don't have a press. And any decent university, at least in my opinion, should have a university press. So, ayun.
Okay. And now we're down to our last question. Sabi niya, "Hi, Boss K, baka naging supervisor kayo nito before. Hi, Boss K, if it's not too personal or political, can you provide insights on how much research in the Philippine setting have yet to be explored in terms of these uncommon topics such as this study? Considering you are one of the few Pinoy librarians that have had opportunity to study abroad." Siguro, ano na lang po yung parang comment nyo with the current research na naproproduce sa LIS, is there still that we need to do compared dun sa research na na-experience nyo from Singapore or studying abroad?
Definitely marami pang work to be done. So I mentioned a few key points in my presentation, but this is not a problem that's exclusive to the Philippines. So even in the US, even Canada, Europe, Singapore, this is true kasi marami, day to day, maraming pwede pang pag-aralan. So it's a good thing, and we have to see this as an opportunity. And mabanggit ko na lang din, I had this opportunity to work with UP Main Library librarians with a training workshop. And I was really, really super inspired na iba na talaga yung level, iba na talaga yung batch ng mga librarians and LIS professionals ngayon, na I was not hindi ako ganung level mag-isip nung kaedaran ko sila. So I was really impressed by that. So there is a lot of hope and a lot of opportunity for LIS research in the Philippines, definitely.
Thank you so much. So very hopeful ang future natin sa LIS research. Thank you so much, Kay, for answering our viewers' questions. At this point, we will now award the certificate of appreciation to our speaker. Let me just get the certificate. And the certificate reads, "The University of the Philippines School of Library and Information Studies presents this certificate of appreciation to Karryl Kim Sagun Trajano, PhD, for delivering her valuable webinar entitled Phenomenology and the Philippine Print Industry, as part of the 2021 UP School of Library and Information Studies lecture series in celebration of its 60th anniversary, given this 4th day of August 2021 at the University of the Philippines Diliman, Quezon City. Signed, yours truly, SLS faculty and head, SLS 60 committee, and Mary Grace P. Golfo Barcelona, Dean. So, Kay, here's your certificate. Maraming salamat.
Salamat! Ang bilis ng courier nyo, ha?
O nga, umabot ng Singapore. Again, thank you so much, Kay. We wish you the very best in all of your endeavors. Meron ka bang gustong batiin, pasalamatan, or i-promote?
Everyone who's here, salamat po. Happy birthday to my sister. I hope it's okay. Dito ko na siya binate. And to my friends in academia, to Miggy in Bangkok, nagpa-shoutout talaga to. So, I have to mention. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I hope mapag-usapan natin to. Huwag kayo mahiyang mag-PM or mag-email sa akin. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much to all our viewers. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all had a meaningful takeaways from this webinar. Thank you too to our SLIS faculty for making this event possible. Special shout out to Professor Nathan Isip, hello, and Professor Mark Santos and Professor Dan Dorado for managing the tech side of this event. And to Professor Johan Frederick Cabab and Mr. Dij Paul Reyes for their work on the graphics and publicity materials, as well as the sound mixing for this webinar. To give feedback and to receive your certificates, please don't forget to register using the link to be shown on screen. Certificate issuance will only work for a month after this live stream, but you can leave an evaluation at any time. If you miss portions of this webinar, you may rewatch it as a Facebook video or check our YouTube channel. For updates on our upcoming activities, please follow us at our official Facebook page, UPSLIS. Subscribe to our YouTube and Twitch channels. That's youtube.com/UPSLIS and twitch.tv/UPSLIS. Or visit our website, slis.upd.edu.ph. You can also catch our online talk shows on YouTube. For the record, Faculty Room, the student produced digital scholarship series, and the latest coffee break reflections and conversations. We also have recently launched a new series called Off the Record. This is a spin off of our For the Record series that discusses key concepts in archives and records management. Off the Record is a student led series discussing key concepts, principles, and practices in archives and records management. The videos are produced by our students, so very exciting in the Bachelor of Library and Information Science program. If you like our videos on social media, don't hesitate to share it. Watch out for our next month's webinar offering on September 1, 9 in the morning with our guest, Benaventura Ven Basco, who will be talking about his journey on becoming a subject librarian. That will be on September 1 at 9 a.m. And that wraps up our webinar Wednesday for August. Once again, this is Paul Jason Perez, your host and moderator, wishing you all the best. See you soon. Paalam.